It all started with one of those automatic gestures, made more to fill a day than to build any hope of happiness. My name is Elliot Hart. I'm 39, and I have an almost stubborn resistance to the idea of happy endings. Routine wears me whole. I always wake up before the sun, take care of the boats on the dock, get my hands dirty with grease and oil, almost to make it clear to the world that the only feelings I understand are the ones that can be fixed with tools. It's easy to live like this. No questions, not too many witnesses. Please subscribe to the channel and leave a like to get access to more stories like this. After a dry breakup, without even a confrontation, I pulled up the roots of what I called my life and replanted everything in Brooklyn. Small house, Riverview, a neighborhood where everyone keeps to themselves. It's not that I'm cold, I just became cautious. I came here looking for the sound of water and an absence of expectations. People only know me on the surface, the guy who fixes the trawlers, who pays his bills at the corner store and lives distracted, as if he's watching a life from the outside. Deep down, I long for belonging, but I never find an honest way to ask for it. In these silent waters I learned that loneliness can be comfort, but also a slow poison. Before I knew it, months had passed and no one really knew who I was. My name, my schedule, the engine problems, that was enough. Even so, every now and then, the urge to touch a softer surface came back, as if I was looking for the right excuse to let myself get distracted again. What you hear here is just the beginning. The full stories, unfiltered and with all the details you can imagine, are available now. See the link in the description right now. If you've ever walked between routine and desire, you know what I'm talking about. Go ahead and leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel, because what comes next will show that chance holds more precise surprises than any plan. The Brooklyn docks have this smell of sea air mixed with oil that, to me, is almost like a hug. Every morning starts the same. The fog scrapes the tops of the boats, one or two unhappy seagulls fight over scraps, and the city only wakes up long after that ritual of damp silence. I trade sleep for the constant noise of tools, the hiss of sanders, the creak of ropes, the hope of catching a clear sky before the rest of the world wakes up. Heading home, I cross quiet streets, low brick buildings, and a scar of rusty tracks near my apartment. Everything there has a layer of the past. Crooked pictures on the walls, furniture from old places, and moving boxes never opened, holding small fears I never had the courage to look at. There's always the smell of burnt coffee and stale bakery bread that I insist on buying just so I don't feel the lack of company at the table. Around noon, the neighborhood vibrates slightly with the voices of street vendors and trucks unloading goods. But as soon as it's after 4, the sun goes down, and everything withdraws, as if gates and doors are there to make sure no one risks uncovering another's secret. On good days, I walk to the pier just to feel the old wood under my shoes and watch the water repeat the same ripples, as if the whole world is on a loop, comfortable and predictable. My routine doesn't allow for many surprises. I follow my internal clock, fix boats, eat lunch in silence, answer emails while staring at the glass of cheap whiskey on the counter. The obligations are predictable, discreet. Living like this, I can avoid questions that would force me to look into eyes, my own or anyone else's. The most impressive thing is that, even while hiding so well, sometimes the universe finds a way to bypass my defenses. Everything went wrong because of a bouquet, or rather, because of a lack of enough attention to a simple address. It was Valentine's Day. During a quick break between 2 parts deliveries, I impulsively ordered flowers for a girl I saw every now and then. It wasn't even love, it was just the kind of thing you do to say, hey, I'm still in the game. Tulips, because they were cheap and didn't have the weight of red roses. I did it all through the app, without even thinking. When I finished, I felt neither pride nor expectation. I simply forgot about it. I spent the rest of the day cleaning a nearly rotten wooden hull, satisfied with the distraction. Time passed and no thank you, no message. It was only after Tuesday turned to Wednesday that her absence started to itch in my head. I went to the website, checked the receipt. They delivered to 5C, not 6C. I sighed, with no desire to correct any error, but I ended up making a note. What if someone responds? On Thursday, patching up a boat bench with electrical tape, I heard knocking at my apartment door. I opened it more out of boredom than interest, prepared to listen to a supplier's bill or a complaint about the building's wiring. And there he was. A man, about my age, fair-skinned, wearing a white shirt stained with blue paint, holding the bouquet still wrapped in that damp, crumpled plastic. An open face, eyes that saw beauty in discarded things. He held out the tulips to me without any fuss, as if he were returning a forgotten newspaper. This was sitting outside my door for a while. I thought it was too beautiful to throw away. He smiled quickly, a smile full of apologies and curiosity, and for a moment I stared more at the lightness of his eyes than the flowers themselves. As I tried to figure out how to respond, I felt a strange thing, a fair kind of embarrassment and gratitude, as if something beyond the flowers had been delivered to the wrong place. The exchange was absurdly simple, but it resonated. I asked for his name and he replied, "Caleb." The conversation ended there, but the impression didn't. Something small and essential had changed. It wasn't just the delivery guy's mistake, it was as if chance had found the only shortcut between two carefully built solitudes. I spent the rest of the day turning that episode over in my head, like a mute trying to find his own voice again. The day after the flowers were returned, I spent some time looking at the box on the table before leaving. Withered tulips, a loose ribbon, and my name written on a card already stained with moisture. I decided to do something different. I bought fresh yellow tulips, the kind I like to see in early spring, and left them at the neighbor's door, along with a note. Lost flowers deserve a chance to become a surprise. I didn't have to wait long. I got home from work, and there was a folded paper under my door. In the end, spring always finds its way. "Coffee, tonight at 7? The invitation was simple. Nothing calculated. I thought it was funny how a mistake turned into a beginning. We went to a small cafe by the canal, one of those that serves bad tea in little glass cups. I expected the awkward silence of other past dates. But no. The conversation flowed as if we were old friends unaccustomed to platitudes. I found out Caleb worked on illustrations for children's books and freelanced as a cover artist for small publishers, dividing dreams and bills in the same sketchbook. Sometimes, he would drop everything and wander aimlessly through the neighborhood or sketch on the building's rooftop. After that, we made excuses to run into each other. I went to his apartment with some excuse. A dripping faucet, help with a screw. Another afternoon, he showed up at my door asking if I had colored electrical tape for a project. Slow afternoons of comfortable company followed, me helping to hang pictures while he told childhood stories. The two of us buying groceries at the corner store, sharing the week's exhaustion. Waking up and knowing that someone would be waiting for a gesture, a message, a piece of stale bread, that started to give my days new shades. Routine stopped feeling like an obligation. I began to notice the pleasure of simplicity, playing cards on the living room floor, listening to old music without having to fill the silence. Caleb laughed at my methodical habits, the organized folders of bills, and I found his habit of forgetting his keys on top of the fridge amusing. Nothing there was extraordinary, and maybe that's exactly why it was so good. With each new note, each casual sharing of a donut, I slowly relaxed my defenses, forgetting the fear of showing myself. Caleb didn't demand explanations. He accepted what I brought, without asking me to be someone different. With him, I relearned the pleasure of walking without urgency, along graffitied facades, watching dogs tied to posts, laughing at the absurdity of trinket shops. When night fell and we headed back to the building, there were always small goodbyes, promises of repetition. It was as if a web of gentle gestures was slowly stitching together what routine had previously just ignored. The problem is that happiness, for someone who's out of practice, carries a shadow. It didn't take long for that internal voice to remind me that everything good can be temporary, especially for someone who had to reinvent themselves so many times. As light as every moment with Caleb was, there was an old fear inside me. What if I'm not capable of matching the kind of devotion he seems to give without even realizing it? What if, all of a sudden, he expects something from me that I don't know how to give? Caleb, little by little, noticed my discomfort. There were days when I would withdraw, invent extra hours at the docks, disappear into boat repairs, just to avoid being seen too much. He didn't demand explanations, but I learned to recognize the curious silence from the other side of the wall. The visits became more spaced out. The absence began to grow in the same proportion as his presence. Besides, there were external barriers. My job started demanding more in recent weeks. Supposed last-minute repairs that served as the perfect excuse to avoid emotional confrontations. A gossipy neighbor caught me leaving Caleb's apartment late, giving me looks that were longer than I wanted to deal with. My sister's insistent messages popped up on my phone, reminding me of the imminent wedding, the need to show up more for the family. Caleb, for his part, wasn't free of ghosts. He had a recent past of grief, a vague story of someone who left too soon, leaving voids that I would never fully understand. Between us, enough space formed for doubts to fit, for insecurity to grow. Would I just be another brief visitor? A mistake of fate? One of those stories that leave behind a longing, but don't take root? On one particularly gray afternoon, I sat in the living room and couldn't get up. Caleb looked at me without forcing words and went to get 2 coffees, sitting beside me in silence. There were no demands, no questions. But I understood, more than ever, that presence alone wasn't enough. It took courage to stay, even when bad memories tried to pull me away from the now. And it was in this tangle of fears and desires that I began to understand. If I wanted to live a real feeling, I would have to give up these shells and, even more difficult, confess my own flaws to the other person. It's strange how, sometimes warmth arrives without warning, breaking the shells we spent years stitching together. It wasn't a party day or any special date. There wasn't even a threat of rain or any storm to justify that suspended atmosphere. It was just a warm summer night, and the open windows let in a breeze so subtle it could only move the mint leaves forgotten on the counter. I remember perfectly the feeling of carrying a slight discomfort in my chest. A good kind of anxiety, like someone who feels an invitation hanging in the air. Caleb was in my apartment, sitting half sideways in the armchair, sketching in a notebook that seemed endless. I pretended to be interested in some random TV channel, but the truth was that everything that mattered to me was right there, just a few feet away, scattered among his colorful lines, in the quiet bits of laughter that escaped every now and then between one drawing and another. The soft light of the lamps covered any trace of routine, creating generous shadows on the wooden floor. At some point, Caleb looked at me in a different way. It wasn't a demand or an open invitation. It was more like a silent understanding, a permission to shorten the distance. I felt my breathing slow down little by little, as if my body was preparing itself for what my mind insisted on sabotaging. We started talking softly, without so many detours this time. We syncopated our sentences, laughing at the fears we had already confessed, the doubts about family, about being too good, the old pains that remain silent but are never forgotten. Little by little, I felt my hand approaching his, almost like an automatic gesture, testing the temperature of a river before diving in. In the beginning, that was all it was. My fingers sliding across the back of his hand, following the lines of his skin until they found his pulse, where the blood ran fast and sincere. Caleb didn't pull back or move forward. He just placed his palm against mine and let it rest there. In the silence, there was music, the sound of our breathing, the slight creak of the armchair, a rustle of leaves outside, all composing a soundtrack of welcome. Desire grew slowly, much more a willingness to be there than any rush. Suddenly, all the noises of the past seemed more distant, a black and white memory in contrast to the colors of that instant. I let my shyness give in a little more, bringing my face closer to his, until I felt the warmth of his smile just inches from mine. I still hesitated, the old fear of giving too much and losing everything. But Caleb, patient, closed the remaining gap. The first touch was made of held breath, closed eyes, and an unexpected taste of tranquility. Our conversation stopped making sense at that moment. The world focused on a small strip of warmth between our lips, on the tips of our fingers brushing against skin, and on the almost imperceptible rhythm of our hearts beating together. With each movement, one less barrier. My arms adjusted around him, feeling muscle and fragility mixed. His legs entwined with mine like roots looking for shelter. There, between threads of light and silent promises, intimacy began to happen in calm waves. Caleb rested his face on my neck, inhaling my scent as if he were secretly storing memories. I felt the hair on my arm stand on end at the sweet touch of his breath in my ear. Time seemed to stretch. The sensations gained weight. Each touched inch became new territory. And yet, it was familiar. Our bodies met without haste. Each movement was acceptance, renewed permission. I discovered the outline of his scars. He laughed discreetly at my insecurities. It even seemed like we were together, inaugurating a new language, one spoken only through touch, through microscopic gestures, through the ancient scent of someone who already knows the other's home. Everything around us took on soft contours. The rumpled sheet, the light flickering on the ceiling, the warmth of 2 skins trying to decipher what had been kept in silence for so long. In that instant, I understood that it wasn't about perfection or absolute courage. It was just about being fully there, defenseless, without promising anything beyond that surrender. That's when I closed my eyes and let my body guide me, feeling Caleb's warmth envelop me, and the delicate desire to belong, even if just for that night, even without any certainty of what would come. The world contracted in that room. The walls disappeared. The time outside dissolved into another composition, and everything focused on the now, made of fragments of sensations. That encounter was, for me, the removal of a final layer of what I thought was protection. Caleb touched me without haste, exploring territories that had been uninhabited for so long, and I felt each gesture as if someone were reading my body for the first time. Our bodies fit together in a measured rhythm, without urgency. His hands slid over my shoulders, mapping every inch, recognizing textures that had been ignored until then. His fingers drew invisible paths on my back, and his breath, close to my ear, created a warmth that slowly took over the room. It was as if each touch conquered ground that had been untouchable, slowly dissolving the boundaries of tiredness, of doubt, of how much I had denied myself. Amid the heat, we exchanged long looks and short smiles, like people exchanging secrets that don't need to be spoken. I felt his touch pulling me back every time my mind tried to feel some fear, and that's when I realized that, next to him, the fear didn't disappear, but it became smaller. It gained proportions tamed by the delicacy of the now. There was an exchange of care that went far beyond desire. It was almost a ritual of tenderness, the kind that makes your chest soften. The scent of Caleb's skin mixed with mine, creating a new perfume, so intimate that it felt familiar forever. My hands ran along the lines of his ribs, feeling the rhythm of his deep breathing, sometimes broken by a contained laugh when something unexpected broke the solemnity of the moment. His body was surprise and comfort, warmth that spread like a blanket, and whole seasons inside a hug. The rumpled sheets became a frame. On them we left marks of presence, sweat, and surrender. Our bodies formed a shelter without a roof or a door, just surrounded by the unspoken promise of honesty. Everything was mutual discovery, the way to rest our foreheads together, to gently bite a shoulder, to hold our breath in absolute surrender. There was no rush or script, just the complicit dance of people who finally allow themselves to be whole with another. I remember the exact moment words completely lost their function. All that remained were contained moans, long sighs, and the music of wet skin against skin. With each instant, the tension gave way to a kind of silent communion. The heat of his body spread through mine, melting time, dissolving old layers of loneliness. Pleasure took the form of comfort, and the peak was less of a grand explosion and more of a slow wave, expanding within my chest, flooding me with relief and gratitude. In the end we stayed there, still intertwined, feeling our pulses return to normal, the sweat slowly drying. Caleb drew soft circles on my chest with his fingertips, and I, in a calmness I had never experienced, just wanted to stay there, sinking into the space of shared silence that had opened between us. For the first time in a long time, I understood that it was possible to enjoy staying as much as getting there. After that night, everything around me seemed slightly altered, as if the light of the next day had learned to invade the room differently, turning what was once just routine into a kind of living memory. We woke up together, stretching slowly, with the naturalness of someone who knows exactly where they are and what they're doing there. There was no need for bigger words. We just kept a long smile, mixed with relief and surprise at the simplicity with which desire had turned into quiet. Physical contact gained a casual intensity. Light touches while making coffee, hands finding the other's face out of a pure desire to remember every feature once more. Deep down, we were still the same as before that climax, but something had shifted. Fear seemed smaller, absence diminished, and the desire to stay became more present. Caleb observed the way I set the table and laughed gently, pressing his forehead to mine. It was as if, in the complicity of that intimate moment, we had signed a silent pact of trust, without promising anything beyond what we were already living. After the first few hours passed, internal repercussions arose. I saw the armor that had shielded me for so long give way to a new vulnerability. It was no longer possible to feign indifference. I felt more exposed, but in a good way, as if I could finally breathe fully, without having to carry so many old burdens. Caleb, attentive, noticed the nuances of this process. He knew when to respect the silence, when to provoke laughter, and when to just keep his hand intertwined with mine until the doubt went away. The next day, I was surprised by a new note on my door. Getting lost is good when, upon returning, there's already someone waiting. I took the words with me throughout my daily tasks. Fixing the engine, dealing with clients, even shopping at the local market seemed lighter. From that point on, the meaning of home was reconfigured. Returning was always returning to him, to his features left on the pillow, to the scent of shared coffee, and to the simple pleasure of sharing silence. It became evident that, even after the delicate explosion of desire, the challenge was just beginning. A few days later, when I had to visit my family for my sister's engagement, the distance awakened old insecurities. I felt Caleb's absence more acutely than I expected. Coming back and finding the apartment silent, without the sound of his laughter or the familiar scent of his skin, made me question everything all over again. How could I maintain this outside the walls of our refuge? How could I be as genuine out there as I was inside our small, private universe? In these intervals of doubt and longing, I understood that every surrender reveals not only our strengths, but also the courage we lack. The intimate encounter with Caleb was, at the same time, a discovery and a test. To accept the other without demanding a breakdown, to admit to myself that desire doesn't need to be sabotaged, to open my eyes to the fact that, sometimes, you have to get very lost before you finally choose to stay. In the quiet of the next day, we each processed what happened in our own way. I held the fear in the same corner of my chest, where hope was now growing. And even without knowing the future, it was no longer possible to deny. We had crossed a threshold together from which there would be no easy return. We were no longer two strangers in neighboring apartments. A story was beginning to take root, even if timidly, in the uncertain ground between desire and belonging. There's no manual for dealing with happiness when it finally knocks on the door. I thought that after that night with Caleb, my courage would last longer than just a few days. But all it took was the invitation to my sister's engagement, arriving like an avalanche for life to test my limits again. In the family group, everything was a staged photo, a formal invitation, an expectation of my presence, and I could already feel the old weight growing in my chest. That fear of not fitting in anywhere, not in the house where I grew up, and not in the new space I was building next to Caleb. At first I tried to ignore it. I extended my routine, work, the market, the minutes stolen with him, all the habits a little more precious now. But deep down, my head was hammering with questions I didn't even dare say out loud. What would people, the old ones, the usual ones, think if I made public what was, for me, already as much of a horizon as the smell of the docks at dawn? How would they react seeing who I had become, in the old eyes of my family and their rigid expectations? I avoided talking about the trip. I pretended it was just another commitment. But Caleb knew my silences. He could read the hesitation even in that simple exchange of looks before bed. He didn't ask. He didn't pressure. He just left the door open for conversation, offering small gestures. Coffee ready in the morning, his sketchbook open next to my place at the table, his hand sliding to my arm at lunchtime. On the day of my departure, Caleb walked me to the door, his eyes calm, like someone promising not to abandon the space of welcome he had already created in my absence. I wanted to say so much, that I would have come back just for him, that I was scared, but ready. Instead, I could only smile, a crooked smile, full of longing even before I left. The trip lasted for hours, but my thoughts went further. I returned to the Brooklyn of my childhood years, to the kitchen filled with voices, my father complaining about the smell of gasoline on my hands, my mother arranging cheap flowers in the jars in the living room. There, I was just the helpful son, the playful brother. The environment carried the echo of the unsaid, jokes about old relationships, comments about how I'm still young to decide what I want, veiled questions and hints. I laughed. I hugged even the most distant relatives tightly, but I avoided every invitation to reveal any truth. Telling them who Caleb was seemed impossible, too difficult to break a script that had been in place for decades. The weight of the unsaid words, once again, squeezed what was left of my chest. When there were no more excuses, I took the first bus back home. The road to Brooklyn had never seemed so long. On the way back, everything in the building was quieter. The empty hallway, the stagnant smell of cold candles in my apartment. I didn't hear from Caleb for a few hours. I sat at the table, staring at the dry flowers on the sink. His absence there, mixed with the feeling of unfinished business, blocked any attempt to distract myself. I pondered. I brooded. I relived every conversation and every silence. Did my omission break something? Would Caleb have understood that it wasn't about shame, but about the fear of losing everything all over again? I remembered his words, his patient touch, the notes he left already anticipating the space for my fear. I was as still that night as the tulips drying on the counter. The next day, I wanted to try to mend the hole caused by my silence. It was early, but I needed to gather courage and honesty in a way I never had before. I bought new flowers, red ones this time, at the same corner market. I walked home quickly, as if the firmness of each step would scare away the old fears. Instead of a rehearsed note or clever phrases, I just wrote the essentials. It was never about the flowers, Caleb. It was always about who received them. I want to be the right address for this delivery. I left the note and the bouquet at his door and returned to my apartment with cold hands. Every minute of waiting felt like a survival test. I took a deep breath, sat by the window, and watched the street until the sky turned orange. I thought about the risks and the beauty of this gesture, admitting the truth without a guarantee, exposing my flaws without knowing if there was still a future there. Night fell, and I still had no answer. Fear whispered, "What if he doesn't come back? What if I had let too much time pass?" Amid the doubts, I found the courage to accept. I will never know if I don't try. Fate, the same one that played with me with the wrong bouquet, had more mischief than I thought. When the clock was threatening to turn today, I heard a soft knock at the door. I took a deep breath before opening it. There was no speech, no apology, no fuss. Caleb came in silently, smiled with a full hug, and threw himself on the couch as if it had always been his rightful place. His absence finally made sense. It served to expand the space for his return. We didn't talk about fear or the past that night. We just existed there, side by side, each of us processing what we needed to. His presence was enough of an answer. The sincere gesture had worked. There are no guarantees, but there is at least the will to try. Staying is a daily decision, requiring more courage than any departure. Time after that went by calmly, with the subtle marks of a renewed choice. The silence between us was now comfortable, filled with acceptance. We went back to collecting notes, to growing new flowers on the balcony, and when doubts hit, we already knew that a little sincerity is worth more than any invented perfection. Caleb taught me the value of that, and little by little, I was relearning. Eventually, he proposed something even simpler and more definitive. What if, in a little while, we plant our own tulips in a place all our own? I smiled genuinely, certain that now, all paths were worth it. Following him was, for me, finally, the possible promise. Today, when I look back, I see every absurd detail that brought me here. The irony of a wrong address became much more than a coincidence. It was almost an invitation from fate to correct my own distraction. I understand now that all my attempts at self-protection only delayed the inevitable. The deep desire to be seen, accepted, and loved exactly as I am. Every stage of this story, from the small notes to the greater courage to admit my feelings, shaped me from the inside out. Deep down, it all came down to the willingness to, for the first time, lower my defenses, face the embarrassing honesty, and admit there are no perfect rehearsals. Real love happens in the flaws, in the stumbles, and, most importantly, in the persistence of them, between those who insist on staying even after the most misguided gesture. Life together with Caleb continued without grand announcements, without the traditional rituals I had always feared. A year after that silent confession, we accepted an invitation from an old acquaintance of his and went to a tulip field in Massachusetts to escape the Brooklyn routine for a bit. There was no elaborate ceremony, just a few witnesses, spontaneous laughter, promises exchanged with our eyes closed while the wind messed up our hair. The old notes were tied with colorful ribbons, scattered among the flowers, pieces of our journey transformed into a celebration. And, as if the cycle couldn't close without one last touch of irony, weeks later, I received a message from the girl with the lost tulips. She thanked me for the unexpected surprise, said that the impromptu bouquet had arrived at a lonely time, and that she wished the same kind of luck for me. May every mistake bring a better right turn right after. Today, I no longer keep dried flowers, or cards that just collect dust. I keep laughter, lazy afternoons with Caleb, and the certainty that, even in the distracted corners of life, the unexpected can blossom. I see the old Elliot in every automatic gesture of my days, the one who protected himself so much that he almost lost what mattered most. The man I am now no longer fears the next mistake, because he knows that courage is not the absence of pain, but the choice to stay despite it. With Caleb, I learned that it's possible to be home for each other, without the need for big words or eternal guarantees. Every morning when I see the fresh flowers blooming on the balcony, I remember the improbable sequence of errors and encounters that brought me here. I learned that the best destination never comes from a straight path, and that the greatest right turns always smell of surprise. What you hear here is just the beginning. The full stories, unfiltered and with all the details you can imagine, are available now. See the link in the description right now. If you've made it this far, tell me, what was the mistake that changed your story? Chance has guided our lives much more than we imagine. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your favorite detail from this story in the comments. Because sometimes, all we really need is a small wrong gesture to finally find the right address. Thanks for sharing this chapter with me. Until the next episode, may it also be filled with happy accidents.